What is up, everyone? Going live, of course, but this live's going to be different. This live's going to be a discussion, an open discussion where I want you guys to be as much of a part of it as I will be. Julian Wright is going to be joining me. I've been talking with him the last week several times a day, just processing everything, and I've learned a lot. I'll be honest, I've learned so much in the last 3 days that's really kind of made me feel kind of duped, to be honest. Obviously, first and foremost, prayers and love to George Floyd's family and all the others that are have lost a loved one due to police brutality and just racism. But I have to say, if you haven't seen my last post, my 400 years post, the poem I wrote, as well as the video that was made for it, please check that out because it came from the heart. It really is the most important post or thing I think I've ever been a part of. I felt it. And, you know, it was interesting because I knew I wanted to do something, but I didn't have the tools here to do a song. So I wanted to do something, so I felt, you know what if I said something? And then that carried on to me writing a poem about what I'm feeling. And what happened was to do the poem and to do it properly, I had to do research. And I'm kind of embarrassed as an American, as an African American, of how much I didn't know. And I'm coming real. I grew up, you know, my family's obviously the Jackson family, with a strong heritage and a strong legacy, and they grew up in a different way I did. Not to say I wasn't warned. Like I've said in many posts, the most I've learned about my people was from my family, not my school, not my education. I learned a lot from them. But I still didn't learn everything. And doing this 400 years, I really dove in. And I was, again, I feel duped. And that's one thing I really want to talk about because this is one of the biggest problems. I'm going to have Julian come on soon, but this is one of the biggest problems. Our education system is letting us down for so many ways. Number one, the way these schools, the public schools, get money is so unfair if you think about it. The wealthy areas, it's pretty much done by local taxes. I think half of the budgets are around half of a school's budget. I could be wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, but at least half of the budgets are from the local property taxes. So if you live in an upper class area where there's expensive homes, your revenue pool is a lot stronger than if you live in less desirable places or places where homes aren't as expensive. So from the get-go, there's a disadvantage. So with lower budgets, they don't have access to the same schooling. They don't have access to the same programs, to the same everything from sports programs to art to, in every way, their school is at a disadvantage. That's number one. And I'm not articulating this as much as I really want to. But number two, we learn so much about the Holocaust and about every other person's or every other country's issues. And I'm not trying to downplay that because that's not in my soul and that's not the purpose of this. We all have went through it. But here in the States, we don't do a good enough job learning about our history. And when we do, it's very filtered, it's very PG. And that's why I feel duped. Because when I did this research, all because of what was going on, I saw how wrong and how much was left out in teaching me about American history. And that's not okay. So if I'm getting duped, Imagine what people are how badly people are getting duped in other parts of the country. Because the school I went to, I truly feel they want to do the right thing. Imagine the areas where they don't want to do the right thing. So honestly, I feel we have to fix our education system. There's a lot more stuff we have to do. But if there's going to be change, because I don't know if I'll ever get to a point I'll be alive when it's right. I don't believe that. But for my great-grandchildren, or even for everyone out there, for a better place, we have to get real about our past and call it out. And how it's affected how we are today. I think that's a lot of another issue I've been seeing. A lot of people are saying, well, that was then, this is now. It doesn't work like that. There's mindsets. There's people in positions of power. I posted on, I think it was on MLK Day, I posted a picture of our Congress and, our House of Representatives. It was like 85% white males or something crazy. I may be up, but that is not a proper representative of who we are. That's not listening. And let me ask you this. If you have to lobby for someone to get a job or lobby for someone to earn a spot on something, it's human nature to lobby for those you know. It's human nature to lobby for whether it's family or those who you know. And if one type of people pretty much only hang out with one type of people, they are most likely going to lobby for their benefits. Okay. This, by the way, Julian's coming on, but this is for us. This is for all of us to get it out and talk. So I'm asking for a lot of you to be very respectful, what's up, Julian?
What's up, brother?
I'm asking for you guys all to be very respectful. I'm asking for you guys to be open and honest. If you have a legitimate question or you don't understand this or something, or you want to make a point that you feel strongly in, I don't care what side it comes from. This is what I truly feel is needed to advance forward. So with that said, ask questions, post thoughts. I will pin those questions and we can get to it. Julian, how are you, man?
I'm good, man. How you doing, brother?
I'm all right, man. So I've been watching you the last week. You live in Washington, D.C., so you're like at, the Mecca in a sense of what is going on. I'm sure the protests there, maybe after Minnesota, are stronger than everywhere else.
Yeah.
Especially with all the all the government and political figures that reside there.
Oh yeah.
What have you been? What do you want to say first of all? I'll let you just.
Well, obviously, the first statement I wanted to make was with this hat. So, now that I've made that thug life statement, because of course, the protesters are thugs, and the narrative keeps getting changed around to the wrong thing. So, I wanted to represent that real quick with the DC license plate thug life. Okay, so. Obviously, man, there are a lot of things that have been happening, and I think that the anger has boiled over. Obviously, a lot of you don't know, TJ and I have been talking about this stuff at length over these last few days, and the combination of people being cooped up, on lockdown during coronavirus worldwide for 2 months or so, and really being anxious and upset and angry. And then to see the imagery of George Floyd being killed was just really enough is enough. Businesses are closed. People aren't working. So it wasn't like it could be swept under the rug, which has happened in many of the other cases of police brutality.
Yeah, and not to cut you off, because I want you to finish your thought, but there's no distractions. There's no sports going on. There's no award shows.
Yeah.
We are all watching the same. We're all tuned into that same channel.
Exactly.
So go ahead.
Like you said, no NBA finals, no distractions. So being that there were no distractions, no one has a job to go to the next day, everyone could really see it for what it was. And people were also tired of seeing everything about the pandemic every day on the news. So, and the simple fact that this was probably really like the most horrific display of violence, because you literally had people telling the police, like, look, this dude is really in trouble. And every time that the citizens said something, the police doubled down on their force. So it just showed a simple lack of regard for humanity, which really goes into a lot of the things that we talked about with regards to Black history here in the United States, slavery, and the myth of white supremacy, which is really what all of these actions are supporting, that, and systemic racism. And a lot of people, without me jumping the gun, because I know you'll probably ask some of these questions, but a lot of people don't really understand what systemic racism is. And it's an easy analogy for me to give you is, let's say we're having the world's fastest man contest, right? And it's a 100-yard dash, right, on a football field. And I'm been working out, I'm ready, I'm in tip-top shape, and I'm starting on the goal line, right? And then a white guy is starting on the 50-yard line. And it's still to the 100-yard marker, but he's starting 50 yards ahead of me, and the gun shoots off. He wins, and he's now crowned the fastest man in the world, but he had a 50-yard head start. And that's basically what systemic racism has done to Black people in the States.
Now here's my thing.
Yeah.
I 100% agree with that. And I believe that 100 with every ounce of my blood. That's what happens, and that's what is happening. That is where we're at. For the sake of this live, I'm going to try to play the other side. So I got to make that very clear. When I say some questions, that's not what I feel. I'm just trying to speak for those who don't necessarily agree with this. Because I've been seeing these arguments. Again, in my opinion, they're not accurate, but I'm going to try to speak for what they say. Because some people will say, that was my ancestors. That I didn't get a handout. I didn't get this.
Right.
I didn't inherit a home. Well, I think a lot of people do get inherit and don't really realize they inherited stuff and that things were set up for them. Because and then here's another thing. We got to remember, Blacks in the history of our nation, we just got the chance to vote. Yeah. So there's a reason why there's not a lot of representation in those positions. We are just now able to vote.
Yes. And not to mention, did we not just only are we only just now able to vote, but there's also the 1965 Civil Rights Act, which is an act, not a law, was put into place to protect Black voters from overt racist practices when they go to vote. And that's not even a law. It's an act. It has to be renewed like every 25 years. So that in and of itself is nuts.
So what would you say, though, Julian, for those who would say,
for sure,
I didn't get anything. I'm not them. What would you? How would you? I have an answer, but I want to know what you would answer.
So the way I would answer that, and let me back up a little bit. I attended a HBCU, which is a historically Black college university. I attended Morehouse College, which has pumped out a lot of Black leaders like Martin Luther King, Spike Lee, Samuel L. Jackson's from our school, Maynard Jackson, who's the first Black mayor of Atlanta. A lot of folks came from Morehouse. Did my screen freeze up?
It looks like it. I'm hoping it's you and not me.
Yeah, it's me.
But go ahead. I hear your voice, so keep talking.
Okay, hold on. Let me leave and come back in. Hold on.
Okay, cool. Okay, he wants to come back in. I'm curious to hear what he's saying. But there's another thing I want to answer, because I've been seeing some really cool questions, and I'm going to get to those. Oh, Julian. Now, let me answer this question while I get Julian in, because this is a good question. Boom. Julian, I'm going to get you back in, but I got to find you. All right, someone wants to know, what age were you when you experienced your first racial encounter? So I'll be honest, and I've said this for years. This is the story for me. First of all, I don't know if this was my very first encounter, but I do remember being in the studio at 16 years old. I was driving my first car that I bought for my Free Willy check from us doing a song on the Free Willy soundtrack. And I bought a Honda Accord. I always wanted a Honda. They were reliable. It was a simple car. And I bought a Honda Accord. And I remember being in the studio in Hollywood and getting pulled over by the cops. And it was late at night. It was probably close to midnight around that time. It was after hours, young black kid. You know, I was probably, you know, whatever, playing music loud, I'm sure. I remember getting pulled over in such a way that still to this day affects my encounters with cops. I was never abused. I was never physically abused. I was never apprehended. I was never pulled out of a car or anything. But the lack of respect and I'm a very I promise you guys, I always try to see both sides. I always try to say what did I was always taught to be right because of what happens to young blacks. And I think his first question to me was, is this your car? And I had to tell him it was. It was a brand new car. I had to tell him it is. Wow, it's a nice car for a 16-year-old. This is what he was saying. I was like, yeah, thank you. I was trying to be very respectful. He made me go through and I hesitate to say this, and maybe I'll cut this story short because I don't want sympathy for me. I'm just sharing my initial experience with police enforcement. But he went through everything to try to scare me. And you know, first on the loudspeaker, second, like, you know, it was just very, very, it was too much for a 16-year-old, to be honest. That was my first, that was harsh. I'm sure there was other moments. I told Frances, you know, when I first dated Frances, she had Lexi and Sage, and Lexi's dark skin. And I told her I didn't want to raise my kids where we were at because I felt uncomfortable even at my school. They're doing a much better job today. But back then I was one of two blacks out of 50, 60 kids in the class. I always felt uncomfortable, even, you know, at Little League or everywhere. It was, and I lived in an area that was, you know, upper class. So I guess that happens, but it never made me feel comfortable. So much to the point when we moved, that was like the first priority, was finding a place that was inclusive. I wanted to see blacks. I wanted to see Asians. I wanted to see Hispanics. I wanted to see white. I wanted to see everyone. And I wanted to make sure my kids grew up around that. I don't know. And I think that's super important because I think that's the only true way our society can really move forward and understand each other, is if you surround yourself with everyone. And that's my biggest issue with the political system and why I don't feel I'm so super into it, because I feel it's kind of rigged. With that said, Julian, you gotta reach out to me, man, because I'm struggling finding you on this thing. Oh, there, I see you. So let me see if I could. Okay, yeah, you coming back. With that said, I've registered to vote, and I'm gonna do more to learn about the voting process because I'm now at an age where I understand completely the importance of it. I don't think I can, my vote here in California, which is a very democratic state, is as important on the presidential side because I'm still going to vote, people, but because, let's be honest, Biden's going to win the state of California. But I will still be voting, so I'm not trying to say it. But at the lower levels, the levels that we don't realize, from who are representing us on the local levels and propositions and all that. I'm going to do a better job of getting into that, because that, to me, is where the change has to happen on all levels. But that's the one that's getting neglected a bit too much. Did I just pin you? I sure did. My fault. I didn't mean to pin you, Julian. I meant to reach out to you. Okay. So I want to also encourage everyone to register to vote. What's so cool is now I was going through someone's story and saw register to vote. Click the little hashtag and boom, within 5 minutes, I was registered. So I encourage everyone who's watching who's a U.S. citizen to do that, to make sure you're registered, make sure your voice is heard, and do your research and figure a way to make this world a better place. I'm not one who's going to tell you who to vote for, and I'm not into super politics, so I can't give you stats. But the one thing I will say this, we have to be unified. And I am strongly concerned, I'm being PC, okay? But I'm strongly concerned that our president is very divisive. I don't watch media. I don't really care for the media. I don't think they're accurate a lot of the times. I think they love to stoke fear. That's coming from me. But at the same time, we can't, when you're in a position of power, you cannot use divisive words. You can't belittle people at all. And I think that's what's, I don't know how that message is getting lost, but for anyone who wants to change, we need unity. It's the only way you survive change, and that's the only way you really move forward as a group is through union. And really to think about what kind of unity, forget about it. You know, I've been accused of many things. That doesn't mean I'm going to badmouth certain people if it's time to be unified, you know? So, all right, Julian, I'm going to let you finish what you were saying, my man.
All right, so I'm going to talk about that, and then I'm going to touch on voting real quick. Let me say what's up to Corey, who's in the house. Adrian, Corey was our engineer in Atlanta, hooked up the session for us.
Absolutely. What's up, Corey?
So Corey also went to Morehouse. So another thing, what I was speaking on before, when people say, oh, that was back then, not now, I didn't benefit. Well, you did benefit, and here's how you benefited. So one really simple thing, a lot of times in America, and TJ, you know, because real estate is part of your professional background, they say one of the first ways to build wealth is through real estate and, of course, education, right? So you touched on education and how the schools are hard and tough, but real estate, right? So there was a practice called redlining, which was very pervasive in the 20th century, in the 1900s. And basically what redlining did was it marked areas on a map within cities or counties or what have you, and said that these places weren't really good for investment. And those areas that were redlined were typically Black neighborhoods. So even if a family worked, had 2 jobs, were professional, what have you, could easily pay back the loans, if they went to the bank just because the area that they wanted to purchase a house in was in a undesirable neighborhood, those loans would either be declined or they would have to jump through more hoops to try to get the loan, and then they would still be declined. Whereas folks who lived in white neighborhoods could easily get those loans, and at many times they were low interest loans. So for instance, and I always say this, most people's sense of history only goes, and this is just the average person's sense of history, in my opinion, only goes as far back as their grandparents, because that is typically, you know, the oldest living person that they know, and they will tell them things about, you know, what they knew. So let's go back to like World War II, right? So the people who are saying, oh, you know, that was then, this is now, many of their families, post World War II, the government, as part of the GI Bill, created low interest loans for the returning soldiers. And that gave those soldiers a huge advantage in purchasing houses with these low interest loans. But of course, the black neighborhoods were redlined. So the black soldiers, maybe I think the figure, and I'd have to look it up again, but maybe it was like 3% of the loans went to black soldiers. So right there, you have a number of people who were able to purchase houses. These houses, the wealth that was built in those houses, they were able to pass on to their children. And those kids then benefited from that, as well as successive years. Of course, the redlining didn't stop. And redlining also did not stop with, there we go. People keep wanting to send messages and it stops. So redlining also did not stop with just housing. It also goes to businesses, right? So if you can't get a business loan, then you cannot spur economic development in your area. So people were not able to have the same type of opportunities to pass that wealth down, or they had to work 2 and 3 times as hard to be able to get those opportunities to prosper in their areas. Now, also when it comes to voting, because you touched on voting, everyone needs to vote. All politics is local. And what I mean by that is most of the time we are taught and we get caught up on the presidential elections, right? But the presidential election does not affect you the same as your local election, like your school board elections, your mayor, your city council, your local neighborhood representative. Those are the folks who deal with the police, who deal with all of the things that affect your life daily. So if anything, if you want one place to start and have change, it's at the local level. So for instance, Ferguson, Missouri, which is where Michael Brown was killed, they just had their first black mayor elected as a result of when Michael Brown was killed. Over the past 5 years, the city council has become predominantly black, and they have their first black mayor. So this is how you can slowly start to change things and have affect change in your neighborhood.
Some technical.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm going to take you out, though, and then you got to try to come back in.
Yeah, I'll come back in.
Out. Okay. So, yes, but this is another thing. I saw a great question. This was a very important question or point. CNN shows one side, Fox shows another side. Really needs a news channel that shows both sides. I think this is one of the biggest issues because like I said, I don't really watch news, and if I do, it's not religious. I don't watch it every day. I watch it here and there on big moments, and every time I watch, I try to watch both networks because I like to hear what both. There's people. One thing I do know as an American, there's people who think one side's tearing the country down, and the other side thinks the other side is tearing it down. So I like to hear both sides and make my own opinion. I strongly feel there has to be leniency on the networks. I do feel definitely needs it more on one. I'm not going to share which one, what I will share is both networks should have diversity. You should see all different nationalities so that we can understand each other truthfully, a true commitment to hear everyone's side on both networks. And that is not the case on one of them. Let's be honest. If I go through each and every program after program, it's the same looking person or the same kind of person who's saying the same experience. There's no minorities. There's no diversity. So I understand a lot of the points, but I disagree with there's a whole message being missed. There's a whole experience that's being missed. And it's very similar to the Drew Brees thing. So it's a perfect segue to Drew Brees. What did for all of you who don't know, Colin Kaepernick football player has been taking a knee for the last couple of, well, he's been pretty much expunged from the league. Let's be honest. He's been out of the league because he hasn't, because of the situation or because of all the negativity he's brought. And that stems from him taking a knee. Why did he take a knee? It was to protest police brutality. Watch every single interview he's done. Watch everything from the very first day. Watch the reasoning. And it was a military. He said he didn't want to offend anyone. And the military said the best way to do it is to take a knee. So that's what he did. And this is my issue. That whole narrative got flipped. That whole narrative got changed. Who changed it? From my recollection, please correct me, it was Trump who changed it by saying those SOBs are disrespecting the military. And if you're not happy with this country, you need to get out. It steered a very angry and a mess to the point where NFL had one of its lowest rated season. People were getting disinterested and it was causing a lot of issue. So now, after George Floyd, and today, there was a sentiment, in my opinion, that more football players would take a knee to again protest police brutality. And this time, the thinking was, this is all my interpretation. The thinking was, we're going to have more support because now people see why he was kneeling in the first place. We're going to have more support. We're going to do it very peacefully. But when we take a knee, it's now going to mean something. So for Drew Brees to come at this moment and talk about how that's disrespecting the flag was either insensitive to not understanding how we feel, or it was clueless. And either way, it's wrong. So in my opinion, he's in trouble. He's got to retire. I don't see how he can rally and get the locker room, who's, let's be honest, is at least 65% black. I'm being generous. I think it's closer to 75. I don't see how, in such a physical sport, how they're going to really have his back. So that was my thing. I really want to know. Let's see. Let's try Julian again. So honestly, I don't feel. It has to happen. It has to happen. You can't do that. It's the same issue I have with all lives matter. It's watering our ability to get our voice heard. It's a mute. And whether he realized that or not, that's what he did by saying that. He just agitated the people who are going to try to say you shouldn't be kneeling, when this is our chance to get our voices heard. And here's another thing, which is something I tweeted, which is super important. You guys have to remember, when I say you guys, it's everyone who's against that. You have to realize that when you see the flag, it means different things to different people. I love being an American, but I don't have it on me, and I should have, and I meant to, but a dollar bill has a big picture of George Washington. The guy was a slave owner. If I ran into George Washington right now, he wouldn't even look. He'd treat his dog better than he'd treat me, Julian, and millions of us. So we don't have that same. He's not our hero, and I think this is very important. This is what needs to be discussed, because I think people assume, of course, he's your hero. He's your founding father. And it kind of reminds me of growing up in a violent home, in an abusive home. Sure, that's the house I grew up in, but I don't want to go back.
Right.
I don't respect the person who was beating me. I don't have to respect them and bow down to them when I yes, please. Thank you. And will you do the 100 too on my counter?
Hey, and real quick, while we're if everybody can hear me really, really quickly.
This guy right here, real quick. and let me tell you, this
Go ahead.
guy wouldn't have liked me. He wouldn't have respected me the way he would respect many of you. So you cannot try to push me on trying to respect him the same way you may respect him. You have to and if you can't understand that, you're not being sensitive. You're not doing a good enough job understanding what our history is. 400 years. Go watch my video. And that's not a plug for it. But if you can't understand that I can't respect him the same way you can, you're missing the point. You're missing it. You're not being humble. You're being narrow-minded. Go watch the video. Learn about our history, not just Black history. Learn about our country's history. And if you really feel that we are in the wrong for voicing this, then I don't know what to tell you. And here's another. And they're all over. This is another. This is 100. But Benjamin Franklin, another slave owner. So we have a bunch of these things with people we look at every day who wouldn't have even said hello to us unless we were doing something for them. And you have to understand what we feel is different from what you feel. And this, again, going back, is why I blame partially our education system, because they don't do a good enough job. They don't do a good enough job. We learn more. There are more movies out right now about World War II, or I shouldn't say right now, in general, about World War II than there is about slavery and civil rights. Let's be honest. The movies are made here in the States. Is it because we don't want to point our bad qualities? We don't want to shine a light on ourselves? We don't want to put a mirror in our face? Well, in my opinion, that's what needs to happen to really realize we're not where we need to be. And I ask any of my German fans, because I know I got some of there, but I heard something, but I want a confirmation. Because from what I understand, and this isn't going to get rid of all racism. It's not. Even if we learned I truly believe we need a mandatory class for at least one of the years of the 4 years of high school where we just study Black history, civil rights movement, and slavery. We dive in. I shouldn't be learning about Emmett Till because I'm doing a research video. I heard the name, but I didn't know the story. I didn't know how he was dragged out at 14 in the middle of the night, beaten up, shot in the face, tied around the neck, and thrown into a river. And then, sure, there's a court case, but take a look at the picture. Look up the picture of the courthouse. It's, I want to say, 100% white. And it's like almost like there's no stress because they knew what was going to happen, which was acquittal. No punishment. So until we can really talk about this and acknowledge that this is what happened, not even 100 years ago, in our grandparents' lives, our great-grandparents' lives, we're not going to get there. And this is my plea for those who think that or feel the need to post All Lives Matter or getting sensitive or not really understanding the message. Spend time researching our history. And I don't mean our Black history. I mean our American history. Not all the great moments. Not how we saved the day here and there. Not how we did this and that. No, research how we treated our American citizens. Because then when the American citizens like myself or many other who voice their opinions get labeled a certain way, it's wrong. It's clueless or insensitive, Drew Brees.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry,
so,
Julian.
Really quickly, please, no one try to send me a message in my DMs. When you do that, it freezes me and I can't talk and we have to restart everything. So please do not send me any messages in my DMs. Just comment here. So couple things. When TJ, when you were talking about the news stations and not being fair and balanced, there used to be a law that all news stations had to give equal time to both sides of the story. And then in the 1980s, the owner of Fox News, and I don't know why his name is slipping out of my head right now. He was part of he was part of Nixon's inner circle, and he had pitched that sort of a conservative news network back then. And it wasn't until the 80s and Ronald Reagan's administration that he was able to convince enough people in government to get rid of that law. And then he was able to create Fox News Network, and Ted Turner was Rupert Murdoch. Thank you. And then Ted Turner was able to create CNN. And now you had news networks that claimed to be, more or less fair balance, but they were really, leaning left or right. So that's one. Then you went to Drew Brees. So let's talk about Drew Brees real quick.
Quickly.
So once again, that narrative was changed to like disrespecting the flag, which you said it had nothing to do with the flag. That is always a diversion away from what the protest was really all about. Lauren, God, I just said don't send me anything to my DMs. Now I'm frozen.
Which is strange, but
it's because I have an Android and you guys have Apple. So anyway, thank you, Lauren. You just froze me. So with Drew, and that's a horrible picture to freeze me in. So with Drew Brees, what happened with Drew and that whole narrative and disrespecting the flag, no one talks about when people make the American flag into shorts. That's disrespecting the flag. I went to military school as a kid, so I learned all the things about disrespecting the flag. Another thing that's disrespectful to the flag is the simple fact that you have a whole section of the country that sports the Confederate flag. The Confederacy was fighting against the Union and the flag. They created their own flag. You do not see people in East Germany running around with a Nazi flag still in their cars or in their trucks or, all of that kind of stuff, because the German government said, okay, this was a bad situation. This was a part of our history that was shameful. They got rid of it. But it goes to show how systemic racism and racism in the United States is actually okay. We turn a blind eye to it and we allow that to happen because it doesn't affect us, which brings me to the next point that you touched on, which has to do with the founding fathers and why are Black people so upset with the country and we don't buy into some things the same way.
Hold on, you got to come back saying this stuff regular. So come back in.
Okay, cool. Hold on.
This is important stuff, and I do want to talk about that because that's another important thing. Is there's a lot of people in our states that believe the Confederate flag should stay, and the monuments that support the Confederate flag or the Confederacy should stay. Again, it's just being insensitive to what others see when they see that stuff. I hate it. I'm sorry. It doesn't bring me back to a welcoming place. So you can't be shocked if I don't embrace it. It's very egotistical and it's not being inclusive. Again, if we're going to move forward, we have to be inclusive. I have to be sensitive to what you see when you see certain things.
I'm back. I see people saying turn off the notifications. I don't know how to do that right this second. Please, no one DM me.
I still think
do
it's happening.
not DM me. Thank you.
Go ahead, though, Jay.
Okay, so real quick. So dealing with the founding fathers, right? You held up the picture of George Washington. You're correct. He's a slave owner. But let's even take it a little further. I'm going to take it a step further. Thomas Jefferson, right? The founding father that basically wrote the Constitution, right? Pedophile, racist slave owner and pedophile. He was raping his 13-year-old female slave and had children with her. So this is the kind of stuff that was happening. You had these slave owners who were raping their female slaves and having kids with them. So, this is something that we as Black people know. And most people don't understand that because they get the glossed over history, right? And it's almost like a tale of two worlds, right? I saw in the comments, the Nazi flag is illegal in Germany. Why was it not made illegal here? Do we understand that there was a time after the Civil War called Reconstruction, where the United States tried to do the right thing, and you had Black people were given the right to vote. And when that happened, overnight, you had Black representatives everywhere in Congress, senators, all over the board, just like kind of what happened with Obama. And what happened there was such a backlash in the South from former slave owners who now had politicians who were over them that were Black, that there was an election, I want to say it was 1890, where the Democratic and the Republican candidates basically had an equal amount of votes, and it was going to cause a runoff. So instead of there being a runoff, the Democratic side, which now the Democrats and Republicans in the United States have flipped from back then. The Democrats used to be the racist Southerns, and the Republicans used to kind of be what we know as Democrats now. What ended up happening was they cut a deal. And the racist Southerners said, you know what? If you get the Union troops out of the South, the Union troops were occupying the South. And I don't know why we'd even say occupying the South, because the South lost the war. So they weren't occupying the South. The South is now part of the United States because they lost the war. And those Union soldiers were enforcing the law and enforcing Reconstruction. But once again, and this goes to the underbelly of systemic racism, in order to keep political power, they put their foot on the neck of the slaves and the free Blacks at this point, and they traded them for political power, removed the troops from the South, and that's when Jim Crow laws came into effect. All of those Blacks who were in Congress, who were in the Senate, they were now all removed. And a very pivotal thing, which we see today, is a propaganda film was then made called Birth of a Nation. And that film portrays the Ku Klux Klan as the knights in shining armor sweeping into the South and removing these ignorant Black buffoon congressmen and politicians, which is far from factual. And that gave rise to the Klan in the United States and Jim Crow laws and everything else that we've seen from this point.
Okay, so two quick things.
Sure.
The burning of Wall Street, the massacre of Wall Street, Black Wall Street. I have to.
And it was more than a burning; it was a massacre.
I didn't even know about that.
Yeah,
I heard about it, but I didn't know about it.
Yeah.
And until you go in and see a YouTube video or see pictures of it, I think you'll start to understand. You can't expect people to things to just change overnight. This isn't stuff that happened thousands of years ago. This stuff happened not so long ago for a long period of time. So for anyone who feels like, okay, but that's then, this is now, it doesn't work like that.
And it just evolves, right? So there are times there was a time when you could just overtly, now mind you, I want to say up until somewhere in the late 1950s, if you go and look up the amount of lynchings in the United States, it was off the charts. So Black people have been the targets of domestic terrorism forever. Al-Qaeda's got nothing on white men in the United States. So how can you feel safe and protected or love this country when at any point in time, forget what we see now with police brutality is horrible, but in the not so distant past, a mob of white men could come into your house, pull you out of your house, rape your wife, and string you up in a tree, castrate you, and burn you just because you said something to them or you stood up to them or they thought that you whistled at somebody, right? Which was always the excuse. He whistled at a white woman, and that's the Emmett Till excuse. That's been the excuse for a lot of people. So those things happened and were sanctioned. People used to come out, and I understand that the term picnic came from that. Picnic was short for pick a nigger. And people would come out and hang black people from a tree and sit around. You've seen pictures of families and people out there watching someone get lynched.
So I know a lot of people, again, I have to play both sides. I'm going to have 5 minutes, but I'm going to go another hour. So I'm just telling you guys now, I know this one's going to end automatically, but I'm going again because I didn't even get to your questions. But a lot of people, I don't want to say a lot of people, but some things I've been seeing is people saying, okay, we get it, but how do we move forward? But the thing that you guys who may have that position have to understand is you can't properly move forward unless you understand the past and what we know and what we've learned and how we feel. You just can't. When we sit into a classroom as a 7-year-olds and just see, you got to understand, every single popular white figure is white, whether that's Superman, Santa Claus, the president, taking out Obama, but that's all we see. So when we come home and we ask that question to a parent, why is everything so white? Why when I look up black in the definition, it's a dirty thing? Why is there black magic, black cat? Why is everything dirty with black, but with white, it's pure, clean, pristine? Why are all these Barbies? And again, it's getting better now. But think about for all of us who are in the 30s and 40s when literally 9 out of 10 Barbies were white. Yeah. Why if I want one that looks like me, why do I want to get one to choose from, but my best friend Samantha can choose from 20?
Right.
So those questions are going to come up to black parents. And they're going to have to explain, well, not too long ago, there was a time where you couldn't go places. What do you mean you couldn't go places? Well, or once upon a time, the stories get passed for us. Right. Because we experience it. So you can't just say, ignore it and just say, let's move forward. It doesn't work like that.
It doesn't. And T, can I touch on something real quick?
Yes, please.
So let's just understand that white supremacy is a myth, period. So all of these things are propped up are enacted to prop up the myth of white supremacy and not to have competition from black people, right? So and let's just take it back to slave days, right? And actually, I'll go a little bit before slave days. In school, we always hear the year 1492, right? 1492. Why was 1492 so significant? And most people will say, well, that's the year Christopher Columbus discovered America. Discovered, right? How you discover something where there's people.
You got like 2 minutes, Jay, before it turns off. Just
okay, so maybe when we come back again, I'll touch on that because it's going to take.
I don't mind starting there. And again, I want to go through the comments and the questions. But I will close this one because we're going to close this and come right back at it so I can get to all your questions. I want to say this. I'm a proud black man. I've always been proud to be a black man, but I'm more proud than ever because of what my people went through, stood up for, and got through at this point without really in a very forgiving way. We've been incredibly patient and forgiving. So when we try to express our voices for things that really affect us, for it to get downplayed and shot down by important figures, forget just the community, but important figures, it hurts. And you lose, just like Malcolm Jenkins said, I used to respect you and maybe one day we can work together, but I can't let this slide. That's true. That's the heart. That's how I feel. So I do want to say this though. My best friends are white. I love them like they're my brothers. I got an amazing fan base who are all colors of skin. I am not prejudiced by no means, and I love each and every one of you. My whole thing for doing this is so that we can move forward, so that whether it's your grandkids, my grandkids, they can all be on the same page and move forward. And I do feel we're moving in the right direction. I don't feel it's the same as what it was 400 years ago. That's not my point. My point is we still have some ways to go. You know, at one point it was voting rights. First of all, it's just ownership rights, voting rights, using the same school or same restroom, same school.
Shoot.
Now the fight is
human rights. We were 3/5 of a person in the Constitution.
Now the fight is police brutality. That's now the fight. Not I almost said not as severe, because it is as severe, but maybe not as severe as voting and all that stuff. It may not be as important now. I don't know if I'm saying this right, but I hope you guys get the point. We're moving in the right direction, but we got a long way to go. And right now the fight is police brutality. So get on that fight so we all can feel comfortable around cops. Because I swear to God, I swear I don't. All right. I love you guys. We're coming right back with this. All right.